Hello and welcome to Masters of Divinity. I am the temporary moderator. Maybe I should let you be the moderator, Patrick.
I mean, I haven't done any thinking about how to ask questions and stuff. Are you wearing a Boogaloo shirt?
I am.
Sorry, let's start again.
No. Well, actually, let's talk about that because they can't take this shirt away, right? Like this is. I live in Hawaii. I can wear this now, like this, without like the same kind of like ridiculousness that you do on the mainland. But it's like this is a symbol of aloha and culture, and like people here in Hawaii that have found out about the Boogaloo thing are very upset.
Yeah.
About them appropriating the aloha shirt for their cause, because it's one of these things that was, Protestants said like, hey, you got to cover up. And then people here were like, well, but we can take this and take ownership of it and make it our own thing. And it becomes this unifying thing of culture here. And like people wear them on Fridays. It's like it's Aloha Friday. It's a thing. It's a special thing here. And these bastards want to take it from us. So, but yes, I'm wearing an Aloha shirt, but it is not a Boogaloo shirt.
Anyway. Moderator. I haven't done anything. If I had done any like thinking about how I would lead the discussion, maybe I would be. But there isn't as much need for a moderator when it's just, FYI, everybody, there's only two of us here again.
Right. Because,
here with Father Bun. Hey.
Yeah, and we're at this interesting moment because JP, of course, is in growing season in his farming work, and so that's been the major focus of his attention, which makes sense. And so he is editing the episodes and putting out stuff on social media, but he is not actively. So he's currently serving as a producer of the show, and occasional Matt is being very occasional right now because of his work.
Long shifts and
and plus we're trying to do 4 people having a podcast over 3 time zones and, technically 2 continents.
Yeah. One of those time zones is on Mars. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So here we are. So it's me, Father Chuck, and Father Funston, Father Fun. We are resisting the temptation to just turn this into like the most ridiculous Episcopal podcast possible. We are here to talk about a movie that just recently came out. The first Disney movie to ever be released on home media while it was still in a theatrical run. A movie that was severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but is also just a very touching movie that affects Patrick and I in a very particular way, and that is the movie Onward.
Onward.
I just watched it the other night, and I sent a message out to the group that I had seen it, and Patrick was like, basically like, we stand for Onward in this house. And by the way, I hate the phrase stand.
Yeah, I know.
So,
anyway.
We thought this would be a good episode to talk about. We would talk about Onward and talk about, it kind of touches on something that I've wanted to do on this podcast, and I wish Matt were here. At some point, I will do an episode with you. We'll do an episode with you, Matt, me, and probably Keelan, because I'm curious to talk about the ways in which we all, like I've talked about over the years, want to do an episode about like media and how we consume it and see it differently since becoming fathers. And what that's like. Definitely
have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, and so this can kind of touch on that a little bit, I guess, because this is what this movie is about. So if you've not seen Onward, Patrick, would you like to give the summary?
Sure. So Onward is set in a alternate version of our kind of modern world, where fantasy and fantastical characters, fantastical like races, like dwarves and elves and all those kind of Lord of the Rings type fare existed in the past, but instead of that world maintaining its magic and its fantasy, hullabaloo, I guess, that world, in that world, electricity is discovered, and science is a parallel thing. And so in the modern world of Onward, you have centaurs and a manticore and this kind of far history of remembered Dungeons and Dragons type questing and stuff, alongside vehicles and airplanes and electricity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's basically like if you imagine Lord of the Rings scaled up to modern suburbia.
Right. And so Onward follows the story of two brothers who discover magic, basically, and that magic allows them to attempt, I would say, to bring back their father, and it goes awry, and so they go on a quest to try to fix the magic that has gone awry, so that they can actually have a conversation with their father. It stars many people, but the brothers are played by Tom Holland, Spider-Man, and I was gonna say Chris Pine, but that's not who it is.
Chris Pratt.
The other one, Chris Pratt. Well, one of the other ones. Chris Pratt, who's Peter Quill.
Yep. So it's some Marvel cut there.
Marvel cut, yeah, some Marvel cuts. Chris Pratt doing, in my opinion, his damnedest Jack Black impersonation that I've ever seen. I said that to Michael, and she was like, "No, it's definitely Chris Pratt being Chris Pratt." And I was like, "He's definitely being Jack Black."
It's Chris Pratt being Jack Black.
Yeah,
I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about so Onward. It's the story where the father has died at some point previous. The younger brother was just a baby and never met his father, right? I
actually think that the mother was pregnant with him.
Okay, so it was before that.
I think the movie. I feel like I recall the movie specifically saying that, like, the dad, like they actually never encountered one another.
And we don't know the circumstances of his death, and it's not really germane. But we do know that the older brother, the Chris Pratt character, was old enough to have memories of his father.
Right.
And so it came out in theaters on March 7th or something, like pretty early on in March. And I've been watching it, watching trailers. I think the first trailer I saw of it, I was like, I definitely want that, because there's a scene in the trailer where you find out that in this world, unicorns are like raccoons.
They're vermin.
They're vermin. They eat trash and stuff. And it's just like, and they like hiss, and it's just like, I said, that's brilliant. Like, I need more of that, right? So I was really into it. I was really excited about it, but I knew I wouldn't be able to see it with my kids. I also knew that it was about this dad who had died, and they're trying to bring him back. I was on sabbatical, and my sabbatical started at the end of February. It was a cycling trip that was going before COVID, was going to take me on about 7 weeks away from home. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to see it. But about a week before I left, I said, just a reminder, Michael, Onward's coming out. Like, you should definitely take the kids to see it. York still hasn't seen his first movie in theaters. Like, this would be a perfect thing for him to go see, or whatever. And she said, "Is that the one about the dad dying? The one about the one where the dad is dead, and you're about to go ride a bike on the side of highways in like the most populous part of our country, and we're gonna go see a movie about that, and then like I'm gonna come home and find out that you've been hit by a semi, and like we're not gonna do that or whatever." So we didn't get to see it when it first came out. But then when COVID came and they said that they were gonna release it, in theaters as well, at the end of March, I think, I definitely watched it as soon as I could, and I was very happy that I did.
All right, good. So there's basically three things I want to talk about with this movie, if I can moderate. The first is, you already touched on this, is like, I want to talk about fantasy, the genre, and how that attracts us to, like, because it's funny that you mentioned the unicorn thing, because I was intrigued by the movie, but when I saw the trailer and they show that clip of the unicorns rooting through the trash, I was like, I'm sold. And it's funny, I told JP that in a message. I said any movie that shows unicorns as vermin, like, I'm on board. Like, clearly they get something that I'm. So it's funny that you and I both resonated with the same thing that got us into it. So I do want to talk a little bit about the fantasy setting of it and what's attractive about that. I also want to talk a little bit about the heart of the movie, which is a relationship with kids and their parents, particularly fathers and their children, because that's an aspect of the movie that attracted me to it. And I just sort of knew from the get-go, like I was gonna cry when I saw this movie. All right, so the fantasy setting, like I just said, we were both attracted to the movie by the same image. So fantasy, of course, is played. You've played Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I don't think I've successfully created about 7 characters for various campaigns, and then usually the campaigns, which tend to be like they were like overnight campaigns, like spending the night at a friend's house or kind of a thing. We'd end up spending the whole time like creating characters, and then we would all fall asleep before we actually did anything with it. So I don't think I've ever actually played a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but I'm very familiar with it. Mm-hmm.
So I have only played Dungeons and Dragons once, and it was at occasional Matt's house with some friends. They were over, and JP was like, we're going to give this a try. Now, I want to note that I am very, very much a product of the Satanic Panic. Right. And so Dungeons and Dragons.
CF episode 3 of Masters of Divinity. I don't know what it was. It was like early. Go ahead.
Yeah, we did early one with the Satanic Panic. And so we've talked a lot about that, of, where, I grew up in this household where, in this environment where Dungeons and Dragons was considered like, level of like the Ouija board of evil. Like you're doing some kind of demon summoning thing. Really quick, what I'll mention is that I read Lord of the Rings when I was in college. First started at college, I decided I wanted to tackle Lord of the Rings. I read Lord of the Rings and I fell in love with it. Around that same time, I started playing EverQuest, which is one of the first big, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I had been into the role-playing genre, mostly Japanese role-playing games through like Final Fantasy and things like that. The idea of a massively multiplayer game was awesome. I was working at a video game store at the time. All the guys I worked with were into EverQuest, so it was just sort of a natural thing for me to be into it. I could go on and on about EverQuest. It's also one of the reasons why I never played World of Warcraft, because I knew that if I played World of Warcraft, I would have no life.
No problems.
Yeah. So EverQuest is
yes, my first episode on Master of Divinity, which I think was episode number 11 or 12, where we talked about video games.
Yeah.
We talked about this.
Yeah. So I mentioned this because I played EverQuest, and I was very interested in all the races and everything. And then one day when I'm working at Electronics Boutique and I'm fronting shelves and everything, we had started carrying tabletop role-playing stuff, and so there was a Dungeon Master's Guide. I had never seen one. It was like this, forbidden tome, and so it was open. It had been taken out of the shrink wrap. So I'm like flipping through the Dungeons Master's Guide because I'd heard about it from the Weezer song, and I was just very intrigued by it. It was this taboo thing, and I remember seeing a gnoll in like the maybe it was the bestiary anyway, but it was a gnoll, and those had been in EverQuest because I had been at the level where like we were dealing with the gnoll's burrow there between the city of Quanos and the other one, and I was like, whoa, like this is in here. So I talked to Bo or whoever this guy was working with. I was like, hey, I didn't realize that like Dungeons and Dragons had this stuff. He was like, oh yeah, dude. He's like, EverQuest is basically Dungeons and Dragons. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my god, I'm engaged in Satanism.
I have journeyed up to the point of Satanism without even knowing I was in danger.
So I mentioned this because this is how fantasy, like this is where like I learned that the fantasy genre and like Dungeons and Dragons and all this stuff are connected. And then that's when I learned Dungeons and Dragons isn't evil. It's just profoundly dorky. Mm-hmm. And so this genre, because of this video game thing and this whole taboo thing, like this is all part of it for me, right? This is all in the background for me. And what makes it attractive to me is, I mean, just one thing is like it's just cool, right? Like just the whole fantasy thing is cool, but there's always going to be like this little thing in the back of my mind that this is forbidden, and so like so it's titillating. But like inhabiting, reading Lord of the Rings, just very like immersive thing. Watching the movies, very immersive thing. Playing EverQuest, which is an immersive thing, But all of these stories are sort of quasi medieval. It's all castles and knights and valor and all of that kind of stuff. The idea that you would translate that up, like sometimes you see like there's certain cyberpunk things that I know that take a sort of circuitous route where they sort of have fantasy elements, but it's set in a dystopian future. Sure. Very few people have ever really taken it and put it in like very boring suburban context. And so to take this thing that, like, for me is like super has this taboo element, this, this titillating thing, to use your word, and then put it in the mundanity of contemporary suburbia, like, you've got a ticket sold for me. I love the setting of this movie. I want like an anthology series set in that world. I wanted more of the world because I was just intrigued by it. And so that was the first thing that grabbed me about it and why I was on board with the movie. What about you? Like, what's your background? Obviously, you've had a little bit of D&D, Dungeons and Dragons to the layman background. So, like, what's your experience with like fantasy, and what's that? Without getting too much into the weeds, because we have an episode on this, but
yeah, I want to respond to that by saying that I'm shocked that it took you as long as it took you to actually watch this thing. And I know that part of it was because you were related, or you were moving and everything, but like, we watched it as soon as it came out on Disney Plus. Like, when they announced they were going to dual release it, I was like, sign me up, we're doing that. I was on it. Let
me just say, I've been trying to watch it for since the day it came out on Disney Plus.
Oh, okay.
But my household is like top to bottom Star Wars right now. And so my boys have been sort of like, oh, we want to watch Star Wars. I think they've watched like Rise of Skywalker twice before they watched this, which
Ernine fought me on it. I think she wanted to watch Star Wars too. And I just said, no, I'm watching this. If you want to watch TV, then you're going to watch this, because I'm the dad here. And we finished it, and she said, I'm glad that you made me watch that. I was like, that will never happen again in my life, but I will take it. She was very excited. And then we watched it, 5 or 6 times in the next couple days. So, yeah, fantasy. No issues with satanic panic in my upbringing.
Because you had a healthy family.
Yeah, no, I mean, we were just
healthy
Episcopalian. Yeah, but not even a healthy church environment. It just was such a different world. But fantasy was always something that was like on the periphery for me. My upbringing, especially because of who my dad has been much more focused on science fiction. And as much as science fiction and fantasy can be separated, often in the bookstores, remember those, science fiction and fantasy were intermingled. And and for us, and for me, fantasy was always a different thing, and it wasn't something that I was super into. But because it wasn't a forbidden thing, I also was conversant in it, and I had friends who were conversant in it. I'm trying to think about the first. I read C.S. Lewis. I read Chronicles of Narnia when I was very young. I read Lord of the Rings when I was young. So it was always a thing, but it just was never something that really like inspired me, and I would say that that's still the case. Like, I definitely see myself more interested in science fiction type of things. But I do remember one of my dad's favorite series, and one that he had me start reading when I was pretty young, was Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern series. Oh. Are you familiar with those?
No.
That's kind of what you're talking about, where it's this idea of like human beings going into the far, going out and exploring planets, go off into the future. But when you start reading the first book, it's this whole world where there's dragons, and there's these people who ride the dragons, and it's like a fantasy world. But then over the course of the book, you discover and realize that what we're actually talking about here is like a far future of humanity, where technology has gotten to the point where we've been able to go off world, and then this world like loses contact with the home world, basically. And they're able, and because they have science and stuff before the science all breaks, they're able to like genetically engineer these lizards to become full-size dragons, and now it's been thousands of years later, and et cetera. So it's like fantasy, but in the genre of science fiction as well. So I did play World of Warcraft. I got really into it. I played Final Fantasy XI before that, and got way more into that. lost several relationships because of that game. Which is like it's fantasy, but it's Japanese fantasy, which it just has a different vernacular,
Right.
And yeah, so it's always been something that's been on the periphery for me, and that I'm familiar with. So yeah, that's my fan. Oh, I will say that the game that I played, just as a sidebar, that I always felt a little like that it was a little titillating. It was just because of the game that it is. It was Diablo 2. But when I was in high school playing Diablo 2, I never felt like I was going to get in trouble for playing this game, but I was always like shocked that I was playing a game where there was like legitimately demons that I was, like battling and using powers and things and stuff. So so fantasy, yeah.
So let's try to figure out, just for take a moment, what is it about seeing like a suburban fantasy and seeing seeing like
when you said that
unicorns and Pegasus as vermin. Why that's so
when you said the thing about fantasy in suburbia, the thing that I immediately came to was another Pixar property, which is The Incredibles. And I remember one of the things that was so interesting about The Incredibles was this idea of a world where superheroes are a real thing, but they have, because of political reasons and everything, they have to have these their alter egos, their secret identities, become their whole life. And just like that's just like I think that's just like an interesting kind of idea. The thing that gets me about the vermin, about Pegasus and unicorns being vermin, is that I just love anything that subverts something. Really, I just love subversive stuff, and like we're in a cultural moment where unicorns are very, 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 very popular right now, and they are very, very, very popular in. And we try as hard as we can to be as gender nonconforming as we can, but the whole like girls section of Target. Remember going to places like Target, like it's completely unicorns, like it's just, and rainbows and all that stuff, right? Which is fine and good and everything, but they're just very popular, and they're always portrayed as very majestic beasts and beings, and it's just like it's impossible to get to find a unicorn that isn't like buff and like they're just awesome, right?
Right.
Awesome. And so just like the cojones to like say that thing that's super popular and like beautiful and is like the ideal of like whatever and everything like that, like that's, imagine that thing eats trash. Like that's what happens in a world where that just makes me laugh,
which adds an interesting dimension to Barley, which is Chris Pratt's character. The fact that he has one airbrush on the side of his van, which is like, that would be like, we look at it like that's metal, but it would really be the equivalent of having a raccoon airbrushed on the side of your van. But
that's the thing, like you airbrush anything and it can be cool, right?
That's true. That is true.
So you could airbrush a raccoon and that would be cool. Raccoons are actually great and cool. They're cool animals. They're only like trash monsters because of us, right? Trash it's not. It's because we make trash, and that caters to the raccoon's kind of basest instincts, and they become trash pandas.
Just as an aside, have I ever told you about the weirdo woman? It was a woman who worked at the family Christian store in Orlando that had a PT Cruiser that had scenes from the Book of Revelation airbrushed all over it.
No.
It was amazing. I wish I had pictures of this. Like just a sheep made of eyes. It was awesome.
That is awesome.
So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that really to me works with this movie is I love the way that they've taken all this fantasy stuff that like is epic and then they've subverted it into mundane things, right? Like I love that so first of all, the Manticore's Tavern is one of my favorite moments in the whole movie because it's this mysterious thing where the quest begins and the Manticore is supposed to be this being, which by the way is the Manticore is rooted in Persian mythology, which is the basis of like the stinging beasts in the Book of Revelation. But she's this quest thing, and you walk in and it's a theme restaurant,
right?
And there's one in a mascot costume, which is, oh my gosh, my boy is watching it with me. We're like in tears laughing at that whole thing. But like what I love is they see that there's like arcade thing in it, and there's Gauntlet, which like the logo is like the Gauntlet arcade game we're used to, but it's actually just like a claw game, which apparently uses the Infinity Gauntlet as the gauntlet to get everything.
Interesting.
Yes. But lots of background Easter eggy stuff if you look around.
Totally.
But I love that. I love that the dragon is like a dog, and he has a little pitchfork wielding villager as his chew toy.
Yeah. It's like there's all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think like what Disney does really well, and I think it's because they do it in real life, is world building, right? Yeah. And that's why I think it's so compelling, is because they just think about all this stuff, and like, finding all the Easter egg stuff and all that kind of stuff. I think we've had episodes about the power of Easter eggs and how they, it's kind of a form of nostalgia catering, and like there's all kinds of stuff about that, and they just do a good job with that. But then they just build worlds in a way that feels real, even though you're talking about elves and whatever else.
Well, it's kind of like in Watchmen, right? Like, one of the things that Alan Moore said with Watchmen is that in a world where there are superheroes, you wouldn't need to have superhero comic books. And so, so they imagined that pirate comics were a thing. So I like the way that this movie did similar kinds of things, like where, magic is part of your history. And so, like, you don't need it to be, and there's just great little things, right? Like the trolls run toll bridges. They run the toll booth. And like, if you look on the window of the toll booth, it says that they accept cash or riddles. So like, and I love the idea too, right? Like there's like the traditional, like there's this little interesting subtext thing in the movie that they I wish they did more with, which is the idea of them trying to erase magic and erase that past.
Right.
Because that's like Barley's whole character.
It's all past of it or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they don't do enough with Barley's character, I think. It's my one criticism of the movie, of how like he's constantly getting in trouble with the law for trying to be someone who's preserving, like a historic, a magical fountain, or he knows about, this historic, path that leads to where they want to be, but like it's been paved over with the interstate. Mm-hmm. And so there's that piece of the story that I think is really compelling and interesting. I mean, obviously it focuses more on the dad stuff, which, let's just acknowledge, this is a really weird movie.
Yeah.
Because it's not only is it suburban fantasy, it is also kind of Weekend at Bernie's. Right.
So we should explain that the magic, it turns out that some people in this world are gifted in magic and some people are not. It is atrophied in almost everybody. Nobody actually uses magic anymore. On his name day, whatever, his 16th or 18th birthday, 16th birthday, we find out, or the Tom Holland character gets a gift from his deceased father that is a magic staff, and a
phoenix stone,
and a spell. And so he uses in a moment of inquiry, he uses the spell, discovering that he's got magic, and the spell acts as a conduit to his dead father. Not a conduit, it just brings back the memory of his father or something, and he starts to build him from the feet up. And then I'm not exactly sure what happens that makes the stone break, but somehow he loses the
heart fire.
Right. He loses it, and the phoenix stone breaks, and his father has only been constructed up to his waist.
Right.
And so it's like only his father's waist and down, his legs, right? And so the phoenix stone breaks, which means that he can't finish the spell, and it turns out that spell is only going to last for 24 hours, and they decide that the quest that they're going to go on is to try to find another phoenix stone so they can finish the thing, so they can see their dad, who has, as we said, been dead for 16 years.
Yeah, so it becomes a road movie. It becomes, and then at one point they construct sort of, a simulacrum of their dad by using like a bundle of clothes. It's in Barley's van, and so it becomes like Weekend at Bernie's, which produces some of the funniest parts in the movie. I will say the moment, the first moment in the movie that made me cry was when the dad's legs come walking out of the closet and Barley taps the little drum beat on his dad's foot. because that was a little game they had, one of his only memories he had from his dad. And I started thinking like the power of touch that shows, because like it's weird like that just a pair of legs that never says a word can communicate so much emotion. And the fact like when it starts tapping on the ground and feels for remind me, what's the other kid's name? Is it Ian? Yeah. Feels his foot. And like, of course, I go to this whole theological place of like the power of touch that we see with the risen Jesus in with Thomas and Mary and the whole thing. Just that little touch communicates so much. And
that touch, theologically that touch, but then also like to shout out Disney's animators, like they are just so skilled now at like conveying emotion through legs, like you're able to see the legs express excitement and happiness and sadness and all of these things that are just from the belt down. It's amazing what they can do.
Right. And this would be actually a really interesting movie to do some kind of like some various types of film analysis on. But yeah, that communication like with the goofy dancing scene, it's like, it's dad dancing, it's awkward dad dancing, but they make it work. It's a movie that puts a lot of different things into one storyline. Does, I think, a pretty good job actually of balancing it out. I mean, there's some things I'd love to see more of, but it never gets too distracted on one thing or the other. And it deals with a lot of regret. I mean, that's probably the emotional heart of the movie is regret. Regret of not being able to truly say goodbye to your father, regret of never having got to meet the father, regret of giving up your past identity as this warrior manticore thing in order to have like a basic business, and rediscovering that truth, which is Disney is really good about that as well, because that's kind of what Moana is all about.
Sure. I mean, it's what so many of them are, right?
Yeah.
That's what Let It Go is. It's, yeah.
And so that's, and I still haven't seen Zootopia. That's a movie I really need to see. I don't know. But anyway, and so I'll just get to the personal place to talk about like as his father's watching this movie.
Yeah. Oh man, I just like remembered your life.
It's all right. So
It's so funny because like it's not funny, but like when you were talking about like, oh, it comes from a place of like, I was like, yeah, he's a dad and I'm a dad, and like that makes sense. And he's even got two sons, just like two sons here. That's what he's talking about. That makes perfect sense. It's not what he's talking. I mean, it is partially what he's talking about.
It's partially what I'm talking about, right? This was like, this movie was designed to kind of break me because. So for listeners who don't know, so basically everyone but my mom, I've never met my dad. He is alive somewhere. Maybe he's listening. I don't know, but probably not. He's a jerk. So, so the story of it, I'll just air my stuff. I don't care. A million, 5 people listen to this podcast, and a bunch of robots. When my mom got pregnant with, now I feel kind of weird. Maybe it's like her story, not mine to tell. But basically, my dad decided that he did not want to be a father anymore. He had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and decided that this was not the life he wanted. And so he left my mom when she got pregnant with me. And I never grew up with that. I had a couple moments in my life where I sort of felt like I want a dad, but then I pretty quickly got over that and realized that that some people don't have dads and I don't have a dad. Like that's just kind of, and it's one of these things I just, as an aside, people in my life that I've told that to have a really hard time understanding, because they sort of feel like, oh, you've got to have some kind of emotional thing about not knowing your dad. And I really don't. Like, if there's been anything about it, it's been since I've become a father. I've sort of been baffled by the fact that somebody would just like not be curious about their kids, about the kid they have. That's just sort of been baffling to me. Like, why wouldn't you even, but in the sense of like, do I feel like I don't feel any kind of hurt of rejection or any kind of like existential thing because of that? It's just like, he didn't want to be a part of my life. That's fine. Cool. Whatever. Like that, your loss. And so, but I can catch that sense of like, what if there's this person that I never met, and they provide like this part of of who I am, right? Like just genetically, and and I've inherited parts of their personality. So there is that kind of morbid curiosity piece of like, what would it be like to meet this person? So like I get that. Where I don't resonate with the character of Ian in the movie is I don't look at that as like I'm going to find some kind of missing piece of my life if I encounter this person. Like that I'm going to suddenly be a more confident person or whatever. And that's probably the difference between having a dead dad versus a deadbeat dad is when you have a dead dad, you kind of mythologize this person. When you have a deadbeat, it's like, okay, well, he's, he was a sperm donor. He's out there.
But also but people are also doing that to him as well, right? You probably did not have anybody in your life who was saying like, man, your dad was so great. Like his whole thing was great. And he was super confident and like all those things that give you a narrative. It's interesting that you use the word mythologize, right? And we're talking about a world that's rooted in fantasy as well, right? That there's that he's grown up with the world giving him, anytime we describe a person, we are giving a fantasy of what that person actually is, because there's no way that we can describe somebody in their wholeness, even somebody we know the best, right? And how much of that we hold on to can dictate what our attachment to that is, and so I think about like, we talk about D&D, right? And like for people who are really into D&D, it can sometimes be because that's where they found community, right? They were picked on or whatever else. Like, it's just like the way that sports work for sports nerds, like the narrative that you are creating for yourself is centered inside a mythology that you become, a part of. And so you have the benefit that Ian doesn't have of people not remembering for you all the time,
Right. And I will say one thing I really appreciated about my family and everyone growing up is that like I didn't deal with a mother telling me that like my dad was an awful person. She loved him, right? And so she recognized that there's parts of him that were lovable and parts that weren't. And so like my mom, she shared some stories with my dad about, that have been helpful for me. Like when when there've been times when I've acted like him, she's like, oh, that's something your dad might've done. Right. So it's like, okay, that's cool. So like, I can think of some positive things that are there, but he's never been hyped up and he's never been torn down. He's just been, and
your mom's not the type of person who would ever have used him as a weapon, like that, used her hurt about him as a weapon to say like, oh, you're acting like your dad was never something to wound you. It was more just like just FYI, like this thing that you're doing. It wasn't right. It's just like, oh, your dad left me and you're acting like him now, and I want to say these things to hurt you. She never did that.
Never did that. She never did that.
Good job, Ron. We love you.
No, I mean honestly, like. I can't imagine a more healthy, like parental situation like this than the childhood I've been given. Because I know that my mom has dealt with a fair bit of them. I mean, you just deal with emotional baggage when it comes to this sort of stuff, right? Like, this person you've been with for 11 years and you love them, and then they just split in this sort of context. Like that's going to bring up a lot of stuff, and it would have been so easy for my mom to just trash him all the time. And, I've seen that. I've seen, what's happened with broken marriages and stuff. And I've seen how that, what that baggage puts on, some kids are like determined to never be like their dad because they know how awful he was or whatever. And, the fact that in a weird way, it's like, my dad is more of like a real person than some people have, right? Because again, there's no myth to him. There's just facts. And so like I don't carry any kind of preconceptions or misconceptions about the guy. And so anyway, that's a piece of this story that like I kind of identify with on some level, right? A very small level, but I'm there with it. But I'm also the father of two boys. And so like for me now, it's more watching the movie about imagining that I'm in the dad's shoes. Mm-hmm. And, you know, what would it be like for me to not have a life with these two boys? And so, and then of course, oh God, you know, spoilers for people, when you find out that the real heart of the story is more about the brothers than it actually is anything.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm glad you said spoilers because I think that it's so much a part of how the movie reveals itself that's the important relationship.
Yeah. And you know, so to just, you know, oh God, like a scene in a movie that like I think of it constantly, and it just always sort of it always hits me emotionally, is toward the end of American History X, when they show Edward Norton's character and Edward Furlong's character as toddlers playing on the beach, and their brotherly relationship that they have with each other, and it's so innocent, and you find out, you know, they grow up into these very monstrous people. But there's this very innocent thing of, you know, the older brother looking out for the little brother and sharing that kind of innocent brotherly love. And you just see where it kind of all goes wrong, but you also feel Edward Norton's guilt over his failure to really, you know, because of him getting involved in his crap, failing to be a good big brother and example to his little brother. So any kind of movie that's going to deal with that, like, it hits me in a very interesting emotional place. And it's weird because, of course, I'm an only child. I don't have any siblings.
Yeah.
But so like to sort of transplant that into see, you know, like these moments where Charlie is just like an amazing big brother to Ford, you know, to see that relationship and the importance of that relationship, and sometimes to think like, oh God, we're screwing up, and then it organically happens and you're like, oh yes, like it's there.
Yes. Yeah.
So to have the movie acknowledge that relationship and the role, and also being a guy without a dad, the way in which other familial relationships sort of fill that void.
Right.
But like in a way where, like, you know, Barley's not trying to be his dad. He's just being his brother. You know, my grandfather played a very fatherly role for me, but he never tried to be my father.
Right.
He was always my grandfather. You know, I've had pastors and other people who played, but they always did a really good job of not trying to be my dad.
Right.
And I've always appreciated that. So let's see them for what they are.
What I appreciated about that part of the movie was that reveal at the end is that it wasn't that Barley never would have come to that realization on his own, right? It needed Ian needed to see, you know, the way that it happens in the movie. He's got this checklist of all the things that he's going to do with his dad, or that he wants to do with his dad, because he never got a chance to do them, and he starts to look down his list and realize that he has done all these things, you know, and he goes back to all these memories, some of them very recent memories, some of them further back in growing up, and realizing that he did get to do all these things because he did them with his older brother. You know, it's interesting. I'm interested in your connection to this because I think one of the things that was so like revelatory about Frozen was that its emotional crux in the love that it was exploring was a love between siblings. You know, that it wasn't, and it took a while. It took a while for it to get there because it was subverting, you know, this Disney, this 75-year Disney history of the most important kind of love is the romantic love between a prince and a princess. And you've got a thread of that and a character in there in Anna who thinks that that's what the movie is about. But then it turns out that at the end, it's really about the sacrificial love that she has for her sister, that her sister has for her, and that they've had for each other this whole time. That a movie that comes out 5 years later is doing a similar thing, is also exploring the sibling relationship. It's just interesting that we're at a cultural time where that's happening so quickly, you know. Yeah. And then Frozen 2 comes out and it's more of the same, you know, as far as Frozen 2. So
Yeah, I think
I'm excited about that. I think that's I'm excited about that as a parent, especially as a parent of a girl, as we talked about recently, who is just going to be like, her whole life is going to be pounded in her brain that like what she needs is a dude who's going to like love her or whatever, and she's being told by these movies now that what's actually important is the relationships that she has in her nuclear family, her friendship relationships, and her relationship with her brother. I started journaling in June. I started bullet journaling, and this morning I was doing my like monthly migration. And so what you're supposed to do is go back and look through kind of everything that's happened in this last month and kind of figure out like what do you want to keep and what do you want to bring forward and all this kind of stuff. And I was looking back at one of my notes, and I said something about how I had remarked about how this one day I'd realized that Ernine is, she always wants. She receives compliments very well, and she receives criticism very poorly, right? But she seems to be the most proud when she's being praised for being a big sister. And I was just like, and I wrote that down. I was just like, that's something is interesting to notice, because she is such a great big sister, and and it's a reminder for me to reinforce that pride that she has when she is, by praising her in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of the complications that we deal with. When I think of this, the what you're bringing up, the emphasis of familial love that has happened in a lot of the Disney movies recently. I think of C.S. Lewis and the Four Loves, and I think about kind of we've done this weird thing where we've internalized in English. And maybe it's because of the Christian stuff too. Maybe as a Christian I see it this way. But I feel like we've internalized this notion of four loves. And so, like as a post-evangelical Christian who was raised on all that idea that that there's different kinds of loves in the Bible. There's agape and eros and all this stuff, and that you're really trying to. The other ones are sort of lesser importance. You're really trying to get to agape or whatever. And so we've really complicated this thing. And then, of course, we always talk about pop culture and how pop culture sort of reduces all love down to romantic love as though it's the only love. Yeah. And so I have this there's this weird duality in the way that I understand love whenever popular culture communicates, tries to communicate love. And so one, it's refreshing to see that we're, that like Frozen can be bold enough to say that true love's kiss can actually be a family member and that not be creepy. But also with this understanding that the English language is very limited in how we communicate love. But at the same time, I think we're entering into this phase where we recognize that, and we're getting more comfortable with the idea that love, like we don't have to have separate words for different loves. Like we can understand that there is this inclusive nature of love, and that love doesn't have to be reduced down to just eros. It can be, that love is it's multifaceted.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it, and I'm glad that we're getting more of it, and putting that front and center, and that it, one doesn't have to be a lesser of the other. And one doesn't have to be a replacement for another, right? Because there's been there's controversy with Frozen around, people trying to say that it was this coded queer story about, two women loving each other, and people trying to, also trying to map the old format onto it and say that, that this is incestuous or whatever, and then of course you also had the fan communities that have tried to oh, they're adopted, and so we can ship them somehow, but it's nice to just have it the way it's presented. Two sisters that can love each other, and it doesn't have to be weird or wrong. And that's a love that's powerful, but it's a love that's expressed differently than the love you have for a romantic partner or whatever. And that one's not lesser than the other. They're equally potent. Yeah. They're equally powerful. So I know I just sort of repeated what you just said, but
yeah. Well, and I think that the thing that builds off of it for me, and I think the reason why it should be such a, I don't know, it should be taught, I guess, this movie, is that the realization that the whole movie, Ian, the character who's never met his dad, is on this quest to see his dad, and then he has this decision point where he can go forward and actually see his dad. And that's when he realizes that he's had this relationship with his brother. But then that also opens him up to realize, based on some of the conversations they've had throughout the movie or whatever, but it's in that moment when it clicks for him that what Barley is, you talked about regret earlier, right? Barley? Yeah, whatever. Yeah. What Barley is carrying is regret, and it's shame, right? It's like self-hatred that he did not see his dad. He did not take the opportunity to see his dad before his dad died. And so he knows in some ways he's more damaged because he knows what he lost and that he made an active choice to not have that. And so Ian makes that love, that filial love turns into agape love because Ian says there's only a limited time. Somebody has to stay here to do this thing or whatever it was. I'm going to self-sacrifice, like this thing that I've been questing for this whole, for 16 years, but for 2.5 hours of a movie is now it's actually for you, and you need to go and see Dad and talk to him,
Yeah. Again, spoiler alert, bold move that we never actually hear the dad other than a recording. Mm-hmm. We don't actually get to see him. We don't really, it's all from afar, which is bold for this movie. Mm-hmm. And that thing too, I think this is the part where I resonate with the character of Ian in the sense of like what he comes to the conclusion of is something I think I came to the conclusion of early on, which is that I don't need this person because the relationship, like what I've needed in life from the relationship, I've gotten other places. So I don't need this particular figure to have that sense of fulfillment, right? So Ian's had that same kind of thing of I didn't know Dad, but I got all the stuff I really wanted from a dad, out of the relationship that I've had with you, and that like you said, he needs this closure more than anything else,
right?
That's that kind of sense of like, right, you don't know what you've missed out on. Right. He doesn't, because nothing really changes for Ian. He never knew his dad. He's never going to know his dad. It doesn't change anything. Yeah. And he actually, Ian, in a very healthy way, is going to put himself in a place where he's never going to have regret. Because if you think about it, like he gets just a few hours with his dad. Is the rest of his life going to be like, oh, if only we'd done this thing differently, we could have had more time, we could have been this, whatever.
Right. So one of the other things that I love about this movie, and this isn't related to anything that we've been talking about, so it's a little bit of a course change, but one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think we talked about this in the fandom episodes maybe, but one of the things that I've been realizing in my own life lately and doing some work on is like how powerful and toxic cynicism is. How it really can become an overriding narrative. In my life, I see it in my ministry, I see it among my colleagues, I see it all over Facebook. Like it's just, I think about it in the terms of in the course of my collegial relationships a lot, where I'm always like in these gatherings of clergy, I feel like it's like this race to the bottom of like who has the best one-liner about this thing that's happening, where like and talk about. Right, okay. And so it just feels like cynicism, and I see it in everything, But one of the things I'm trying to kind of like think about and reckon with is who was it I was listening to, or I was talking to somebody. I remember listening to something where they were talking about how like I don't want to be defined by what I hate, I want to be defined by what I love, and that's
always The Last Jedi.
I don't think it was that.
It's exactly
is that the message of Star Wars?
Yeah.
No, that's funny. No, it wasn't.
We don't win by destroying what we hate. We win by preserving what we love. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, the idea of like, when you're in high school, you're defined by like, oh God, the jocks, or the like if you ask somebody like, who are you? We self-define when we're younger. We self-define most often by saying what we're not, right? And that part of the journey of self-actualization is to say, who are you? And then be like, this is who I am, and these are the things that I'm really passionate about. And what I love about another thing that I love about this movie is that it's really a journey of following somebody in the Barley character, the Chris Pratt character, who just like wholeheartedly loves what he loves, and like no people have been trying to take it away from him like for his whole life. You know, he's into history, which is really just magic, which is really just D&D, right? But like he's really into it, and it is his like central defining character. And that what ends up happening on this quest is that his journey and his love, you know, transforms his brother, certainly, but then also just like transforms all these other people who he comes in contact with, and they claim who they are. They claim, the Manticore claims who she is, this badass, you know, fire breathing, sword bearing thing. Even the little pixie biker gang, right? Like they have this crazy interaction with this. It turns out that pixies have turned into biker gangs because they don't know how to fly anymore. Like they don't have that ability anymore, and because of their interaction with this couple of kids and the legs of the dad, like they realize like that they can fly now, and that's a much better way to get around than riding, you know, Harleys. Yeah. You know, like that keeps the mother is able to claim some of her power. You know, like it doesn't that his infectious love makes the world around him better.
Yeah.
And it gives people permission to love stuff too.
Yeah, there's a similar theme in Moana around, you know, basically about, and I actually wrote a blog post about this. I should probably do something with it, try to get it like published somewhere else, because I think that there's some depth in, as a church thing, a conversation about appealing to deeper tradition rather than recent tradition. We tend to look at recent tradition as though that, you know, but the problem with Christianity, we don't go further enough back to be able to talk about stuff. And that's like Moana's whole thing, right? Like the dad is trying to use a tradition to say, you know, oh, we never leave this island. You know, that's the whole thing he says in the song. This tradition is our mission. But actually, Moana discovers there's a deeper tradition for her people to be explorers, and that's actually the way to go forward. And that's that similar thing to Barley's character, is that he's like, no, we were magicians. We did this stuff. Like this stuff existed. We were better. We were more fully who we were when we were more appealing to this thing rather than, I mean, honestly, you could say like modernity. Modernity came in and ruined us, which that's a deep thing for a Pixar movie. Well, sure. I don't know. Pixar movies are always really deep, but yeah, but that same kind of thing to Moana. Moana's generally a very positive person in the movie. You know, she's very confident in the sense that, you know, this urge that she feels is the thing that's actually true. And the movie is basically about confirming that she's something that she's always known to be true. And Barley is a similar kind of character. But I'm with you on that we live in this very cynical world. And I love that race to the bottom of who can have the best quippy one-liner to dismiss something. I feel that. Yeah. And for me, to speak about it in that specific context, is that then becomes the entire way that I engage the material. Like I had to tell a friend, like, I'm not going to be texting you. This clergy gathering, I'm going to try really hard to not engage this group text where we're just constantly like doing this, because I want to like be better. I want to be able to like pay attention to this, not trying to find out how I can be funny, because then I'm filtering it through that instead of filtering it through like what can I actually get out of this. Yeah, and and with the podcast here, I mean, there's a temptation for us to do that, right? Like, I mean, that's I mean, it's something that I know JP and I, you know, have wrestled with, and you've called us out on it a couple times. It's so easy to like tear stuff down, right? I think a little bit about the Katy Perry episode, by the way, because it was like, but I will say, I really was excited about engaging with that. Like, I had high hopes with that album, and I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. And then I found out that she was a dirtbag, and I was like, oh, no. And then, so like, that tainted the way I listened to it. And the whole time I listened to it, I'm like, oh, no, and then I was also like, this just isn't good. But whatever. So I wasn't actually just like listening to it with the mindset of like, let's be, how can I take it down? It was actually like, I think I tried to actively critically engage with it. But yeah, and I think that, well, and we've talked about this, I think, you and I a couple times here, about the Episcopal. Sorry to get Episcopalian on you for a little bit, folks, but I feel like the Episcopal Church is really guilty of this defining ourselves by what we're not thing. I've realized that over the years, because, you know, we're made up of this really interesting combination of cradle Episcopalians and then people who've come to us from other denominations. And those of us who come from other denominations, of course, we come to it with this very convert zeal. And I think that as a result of that, we wind up in leadership positions because we're, that's just the way things work. You show enthusiasm, be on this committee, do this thing.
Right.
And as a result, I think we've got a lot of people who carry, damage and baggage from their previous denominational, I know I did early on, their previous denominational upbringing. And so there's this real quick thing of trying to like, oh, we're better, right? There's a meme that's been going around that said something like Episcopalians or Anglicans proclaiming Jesus with a sense of smug superiority since 536 or something like, or whatever.
Very much.
Yeah. So there is this sense of like, oh, well, we're not like those Christians over there.
Totally.
But the problem is that we then don't ever do a really good job of then talking about what it is to be an Episcopalian, which is why I think we suck at evangelism. Mm-hmm. Because it's hard. How do you proclaim good news when your good news is, well, we're not that?
Yeah.
That's why I think I found it really refreshing when Michael Curry first became presiding bishop, because he was very proactive in saying, like, we're the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement. Like, that's a great phrase. Mm-hmm. But we need to go further than just a bumper sticker, right? We got to know what the benefit is with that. But I think, again, this is for us, Inside Baseball is the Episcopal Church, but I think it does touch so much other things in our life that, we do this really, we really do need to do a better job of saying, and also you can like things just for liking things,
right?
You don't have to have a reason, right? Yeah. And I think Barley's a good example of that. He likes fantasy. He doesn't need a reason.
I'm laughing about. I'm looking through quotes from the movie, and I'm remembering. I didn't get a chance to rewatch right before we filmed, because it's been several weeks since I watched it, but I'm a sucker in comedy type movies for foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And the whole gelatinous cube thing, like,
oh yes,
God, it just played off so well, and I just want to throw that out there. It's so funny because it is such a ridiculous beast,
Right. Well,
but it's a real thing in D&D, and they treat it. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, sorry. what I do love about the way you talk about subversion, the gelatinous beast is kind of like an early on encounter in a lot of D&D campaigns,
right?
I understand. But it's also like in most fantasy video games, like slimes are a low level thing. They're not the thing that you're like working up to fight. And the fact that this movie sets it up as like the final, almost as like the mini boss,
right,
is pretty funny.
It is pretty funny.
And let's be honest, a gelatinous cube would be horrifying in real life.
Yeah, it would be. That would totally eat stuff. I have to tell you, while we're talking about gelatinous cubes and early encounters, I downloaded a Kindle book that was free, or like I got it as part of my Kindle, or my Audible subscription, excuse me. And I gotta tell you the name of this book. How to defeat a demon king in 10 easy steps.
Great.
It's short. It's only, I don't know, maybe like 4 hours long or something, and maybe only 2.5 hours. Anyway, it's a short book, and it's about. It's a great book. As somebody who loves Zelda, I would highly recommend it for you. But the whole story is about how it's this character who isn't. It's kind of in a Zelda type world where there's this cyclical nature of things, that a demon king rises, and then a hero is born, and the hero goes off on this quest and visits all these temples, and then gets the power they need to defeat the demon king, and then it happens again, however many years later or whatever. And that the main character of this book is somebody who is born the demon king. The demon king rises a little earlier and then plays politics better, and so doesn't actually spur the creation of the hero or something like that. And so this kid decides that she's going to be the hero. And so how does she go about doing that? And it's all about how she chooses all these different classes and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that she does is she, in this world, everybody battles and everybody it gets experience points and all this kind of stuff. And so she puts all of her points into early on. She puts all her points into like slime master or something like that, to basically become just like super efficient at killing slimes and tracking slimes. And then because she's put all these points in this, she actually is able to find these like super rare slimes that give crazy amounts of experience. And it's just like a very funny like play on that idea of like, these are the first creatures you usually fight, and then you go on to the bigger things, you know.
Yeah, there's an anime. I can't remember the name of it. I haven't seen it, but I read the synopsis about it like probably like 4 or 5 months ago. That's about a guy who dies and reincarnates as a slime. And so the whole story is him just in a dungeon waiting for the hero to show up.
Wow, that's funny. Just sitting there, and they always bounce around and stuff too. It makes me think about the Dragon Quest series of video games. Like, it's called Dragon Quest, but the most iconic image from those games is like the first slime you fight. It's like this little blue. Anyway, we got a little bit off the beaten path. It was all in the fantasy realm, but
yeah. Are there any final thoughts, Patrick, on Onward?
I would highly recommend it if you still haven't seen it. Make your kids watch it; they will thank you. Do it. I will also say, just as a sidebar in related news, Friday this last Friday, the docu-series of the making of Frozen 2 came out on Disney Plus, and it is also very good.
Is it gallery? Is it like the Mandalorian
It is
thing?
kind of like gallery, yeah. It's 6 episodes, 35-minute long episodes. One of the things I really like about it is that, it's more of a docu-series in that it follows in a timeline kind of fashion, in real time. And while the musicians and the voice actors and the directors and producers are all like the main characters of the documentary, the moments that I really like the most is that they check in on kind of the lower level like animators, the woman who's in charge of like, the last 10 seconds of one of Elsa's songs or whatever. You get to see how she kind of does her work, and that's just great. Like I was telling a mutual friend of ours, David Romanek. I was telling him that, he was like, yeah, I didn't know if the girls would be interested in it or whatever. And I was like, I made Erin watch it. Like because I was like, I didn't want, he was saying, I didn't know if I wanted to like break the fantasy of like what's going on the screen or whatever. And I'm like, no, I made Erin watch it because I want her to know, like, not only that people put in actual work in there, but that's something that she can do. Because if she starts like drawing and coding now, like, she's gonna take over the world. Like, let's get this started.
Well, makes me think.
I highly recommend it.
Well, in Onward, there's the extras on Disney Plus. There's like some behind the scenes stuff, and one of the things they showed that they did is they wanted the animators to know the experience of what Ian was going to be like when he takes that step of faith with the trust bridge spell. And so they actually plug the thing into a VR headset, and they put them on like platforms that only drop down about a foot, but the VR headset makes it look like a bottomless pit. And they're holding a pole like the thing. The funny thing is, that's the thing Ford talks about.
Right.
We watched that, and that's the thing he talks about is that bit rather than the actual movie itself. He talks about the behind the scenes thing. He's like, all those people were holding those things like a Kylo Ren's lightsaber as they were stepping off this. It captures our imagination to kind of see how this stuff works out and how it's all made. I highly recommend Onward. I don't know that I would say it was like Pixar's best movie, but it's very different than a lot of Pixar movies. But obviously the themes and stuff in it we've talked about are very deep, and I want to watch it again. Like I said, I would kill for a anthology series or something set in that world. Yeah. Like I would love to see like the different corners of what's going on there.
Even like a comic book adventure or something, like even a different media. Yeah, like it doesn't have to be, something difficult to be animated or whatever, but if there was just like even like a novelization of something or whatever would be cool.
Yeah. Also, just as a side note too, this movie had its own controversy in that it was like all this big stuff about the fact that it depicts Pixar's first openly lesbian character.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the funny part is that it's in typical Disney fashion. It's something that could be easily edited for places, but it was the Cyclops police officer.
Okay.
And pulls them over when they use that spell to look like the Bronco
Mm-hmm.
dude.
Mm-hmm.
And she makes a comment. She says, "Oh yeah," she's like, my girlfriend's daughter's got me pulling my eyebrows out or something like that. And that's it. But in advance of the movie coming out, there was all this controversy, and apparently like it was banned in some countries and stuff because of one line of dialogue. Yeah.
Which also just puts me in mind of like how amazing the end is with the centaur.
Yes.
Claiming his centaurness. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie though, that given that this came out when it did, and I watched like the stuff with the fact that she's dating a cop and all that, like I was a little bit like, in this media landscape, I don't know.
It does all right.
Yeah, but it's a good.
Right.
It is a good movie, and good themes, and weird. It's a weird movie, and there's so many things we haven't even touched on. Again, like we touched lightly on the Pixies, which are very funny. We didn't even talk about the mom,
right?
And all that, but definitely a good movie, definitely a good thing to check out. Also, continues the trend of fathers not faring well in Pixar films. Lots of dead fathers in Pixar.
They've got a lot of yeah. Well, it's moms in early Disney, so it's about time we had our due, right? So
yeah. So check it out. All right, well, Patrick, It was good having you on as always.
Always a pleasure. I miss the real hosts, but I've been enjoying this run.
Yeah, well, it's been good having you, and as long as growing season continues, you'll be on here if you're interested. Of course, for the listeners who don't know, any minute now I could have another baby.
Yes.
My wife is at home, very much pregnant. That will determine our release schedule, I think, at this point. So, if Kana goes into labor, I'm not going to lie. There's a small part of me that kind of wishes that
it happens while you're recording.
I'd be like, gotta go.
Her release schedule will determine your release schedule.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up? It's your moderator, JP. Just pausing this episode for a minute because I wanted to announce that actually, as of this recording, Father Chuck and his wife, Kana, have given birth to a newborn baby girl. Her name is Cora Vaughn, and we are all looking forward to the day when Father Chuck has to explain to his daughter that in 2020, Daddy was a podcaster. Anyway, congratulations, Father Chuck and Kana, and on behalf of all of us at Masters of Divinity, welcome to Earth, Cora. Be sure to check out the Grand Canyon while you're here.
And so with that, remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, I don't know, support us on Patreon. I'm just trying to think of all the other stuff that we've got going on, but
like, subscribe, hit the bell,
pledge to my church, pledge to Father.
Share this video. Yeah, that's right. You can donate on Facebook and on donorbox.com/St. Paul's MHK.
There you go. We are not in any kind of online, so you can just make your checks payable to St. Honolulu, Hawaii. We'll gladly accept whatever it is you want to give us. Some stewardship specialist would hear this and be like, yes.
Yes, all right. We're getting the viral marketing thing down.
Yeah. So with that, everybody have a good weekend, good journey.
Good journey.
And mahalo.